Welcome to another edition of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on Twitter at MMALOTN. And this week we're going over UFC Vegas 28, headlined by a big fight between Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Augusto Sakai. Big fight, I mean, in stature, not so much in the ability to determine who's going to be a number one contender or who's even going to crack into the top five. I made a joke, earlier in the week talking about, I don't know who watched their last two fights that came to the conclusion that these two should probably be fighting in the main event. But here we are. We got Sakai and Rozenstruik in the main event, but I'm here for it regardless because it is a UFC event and it is another opportunity for us to go out there and make some money. Quick thoughts about the event. The fight that I'm looking forward to most by far is Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Miguel Baeza. Very, very excited for that fight. Can Santiago Ponzinibbio go out there and showcase what he used to be? Was the Li Jingliang fight just a fight for him to get his feet wet? And then Baeza, biggest step up in his career, 10-0, very promising prospect, but easily the most toughest competition that he's had to go up against. Far cry from Takashi Sato and Matt Brown, especially if Santiago Ponzinibbio can tap into what he used to bring to the table before that extended layoff and then eventually coming back and getting knocked out by Li Jingliang. A couple other fights that I'm a little bit intrigued by. Marcin Tybura versus Walt Harris. Is Walt Harris going to be able to get him out of there early, or is Tybura going to be able to go out there and get it done a little bit later? Tom Breese, is he going to be able to reverse his fortunes from that Omario Akhmedov fight and pull off the win here against Antonio Arroyo? The odds suggest he should. Will he go out there and do so? We're not 100% sure. And then obviously Manon Fiorot is a girl that I'm very intrigued by. She had a very successful UFC debut against Victoria Leonardo, where she was able to knock her out in the second round. And then she's going up against her toughest test to date in Marina Moroz, who should be able to push her and show us if Fiorot truly has the chops to go out there and crack into the top 10 of this division. So couple intriguing spots, if I'm not mistaken. This is also another early card, just like our last one. We're going to have a 4 p.m. Eastern prelim start time and 7 p.m. main card start time. I could be off on that, but I believe that's what I saw on the ESPN schedule. So don't be sleeping on this card. It's going to be an earlier card, which I love. 10:30 p.m. Eastern finish time. Sign me up. I'm always about it. Not to mention, I might actually miss it this weekend. This weekend's my first wedding anniversary with me and my wife. We're going to be going to a nice little cottage Friday night all the way till Monday. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to be catching the card on Saturday. I'm not even going to bother thinking that I'm going to watch it because I don't want to, have my work impede on my vacation time. But again, it's going to be hard to not think about it and wonder what the results are. So there's that as well. All right. Let's get into the betting recap of our last event, as we always do. As you guys know, Transparency 101. Always talk about your last fight or last event in terms of betting, and just be transparent with everybody. That's why we third party track. That's why we don't hide from our losses. And, we did lose 2 straight events a couple weeks ago where we had Bellator 258 and UFC Vegas 27 where we had an 11 event winning streak. It get busted there. And now we're back to 2 straight winning events with UFC 262 where we cashed. And then most recently UFC Vegas 27 where we hit once again. It's a clean sweep. So we'll start off with the dog of the night play, which was Carla Esparza at 2 units at plus 100. Shout out to anybody that got her at plus 140. That crazy lines that she was at earlier. There's nothing on tape that let us know that Yan Xiaonan had a good defensive wrestling game. She's never shown a good defensive wrestling game. The Claudia Gadelha fight was a great look for her, but we know Gadelha really does start to slow down, and Carla Esparza does not. Carla Esparza didn't even need the full 50 minutes as she was able to go out there and get her first finish in a long time. I don't even recall the last time she got a finish before that fight, but a good way for our Esparza to truly solidify herself as possibly one of the next people to fight Rose Namajunas, who she already has a win over. She did, if you guys remember, she won that strawweight title, the inaugural strawweight title fight over Rose Namajunas, as that was the final in the Ultimate Fighter season that they were doing, and she was able to capture the title there. So there's a good little built-in storyline if they do decide to go with Carla Esparza for the next title shot. Good plus 2 units there for the underdog or the dog of the night play. And then our lock of the night play, it's almost looked down upon to be doing chalky parlays, but when you have such when you have such a discrepancy in skill level, you got to do it. I will say, though, the Damir Ismagulov one was a little bit hairy, especially in that third round. As you saw, Alves, who I was expecting to really slow down late in that fight, did not slow down at all. We saw him really put it on Ismagulov in that third round, but Ismagulov still gets his hand raised, as he did have a very strong first 2 rounds, which he was able to, again, get his hand raised via decision. And then the Bruno Silva fight, as one-sided as I expected it to be. I probably should have just went all in on round 1 Bruno Silva, as he went out there and absolutely dusted Victor Rodrigues. Didn't even make a sweat for it. I will say this, I was watching it on a stream. My stream cut out right before the fight started. When it came back, I just saw the replay of Victor Rodrigues get knocked out, and that was more than enough for me to be happy, because I know we just cashed our lock of the night play that night. So that was plus 3.02 units on a minus 166 parlay between Bruno Silva and Damir Ismagulov. So we cashed plus 5.02 units on that night, and we're right back to a two event winning streak. Which brings us to UFC Vegas 28 to hopefully get us back on a 3-event winning streak, which will make all my plays behind the Patreon paywall once again. I will remind you guys, a great leeway as always into the Patreon plug. Check out the Patreon, link is in the description below. You guys get my picks as soon as I drop them, compared to the public who has to wait until the Friday before the fights, where the lines are probably not the same anymore. So Patreon members get the picks immediately. They also get early access to the breakdowns, as well as the best bets and props article, where I go through every single fight on the card, give you my best bet and my best prop for every single fight, so you guys can kind of make up your own mind in terms of which fights you want to tackle. And I do give you guys a confidence rating beside each bet too, to let you guys know how confident I am in every single spot. So great perks on the Patreon. Not to mention the Discord chat has been popping for the Patreon. So shout out to all my guys on the Patreon and the Discord, especially because we've been giving out some decent winners. Myself, as well as a bunch of other dudes, have been remaining very active on the community picks thread on the Discord. So if you are a part of the Patreon, or you're looking to join the Patreon, make sure you guys connect to the Discord, because it is very helpful, and we got a great positive community over there that a lot of people enjoy watching, being a part of and staying active. Like, those are my boys. Now I can't wait to meet up with them one day, but those guys in the Discord are truly something special. So make sure you guys check that out. Secondly, Coolbet.com, promo code MMALOTN2. If you guys are looking for a new bookie, Coolbet is a great way to go out there and try to secure some extra cash. They're one of the few websites that lets you go out there and parlay props. They got some great odds too. They're only available in select few countries, I believe Canada, some South American countries, as well as a bunch of Scandinavian countries. They're all listed in the description below. But if you guys are looking for a new bookie, do check out coolbet.com. They are awesome. Once again, use promo code MMALOTN number 2, and they'll match your initial deposit up to $200. So trust me, you're going to want to take full advantage of that. Coolbet.com, promo code MMALOTN2. And there we have it. Those are the plugs. Those are the betting recaps and my quick thoughts on UFC Vegas 28. So without further ado, let's just get into the breakdowns. I hope you guys enjoy them, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Jordan Leavitt versus Claudio Puelles. We got minus 200 on Leavitt and plus 170 on Puelles. Now, Puelles hasn't been fighting in the UFC, let me rephrase that. He's been in the UFC since about 2016, but has only competed 3 times. He's 2-1. He lost that one fight, which was actually the Tough Latin America number 3. That was the final for his division. I believe it was at lightweight. Martin Bravo ended up knocking him out in the second round, and then moving down to featherweight and competing there. But he's had a lot of time off in between fights, right? He lost that fight, then he comes back, takes a beating to Felipe Silva, eventually finishing him in that third round with a beautiful comeback knee bar. And then the last fight, he fought Marcos Mariano. I believe that was in 2019. And he pretty much dominated him, right? That was a minus 400 type of performance from Claudio Puelles, taking down Marcos Mariano relatively easily and just controlling him. A couple submission attempts, good ground and pound, but Mariano was tough enough to tough it out and see that 15-minute and see that judge's scorecard. But Claudio Puelles absolutely dominated him in that very one-sided fight. Now, I'm not a big Jordan Leavitt believer, right? The guy's 8-0, big knockout victory in his last fight against Matt Wiman. 23 seconds into the fight, absolutely slams Wiman on his head and knocks him out. Not a lot of people expected that. I thought if, a lot of people thought that if Leavitt won that fight, it would probably be by decision, right? Leavitt has a very good ground game, able to get his opponents down and kind of just grind them out. But Matt Wiman had never been submitted in his career, and he's gone up against some pretty good jiu-jitsu artists in most recent history. Jordan Leavitt before that notched his UFC contract by winning on the Contender Series back in 2020, where he was able to submit Luke Flores with a beautiful submission. I believe it was a choke, if I'm not mistaken. Beautiful finish for him there in that fight too. But one thing that we see often with Leavitt is that he's just not comfortable on the feet, right? Like the guy, he throws the strikes out there to kind of just eventually close the distance and get the fight to the ground, but there's not much technique behind it. It's very sloppy. It's not, the most technical. If people are able to stop the shots of Jordan Leavitt, they're going to have a lot of success in terms of actually knocking him out or having a lot of, even just winning the fight, handing Leavitt that first loss on his record. The Luke Flores one was very mystifying to me, right? Flores was more than willing to engage in the jiu-jitsu outward department with him, and maybe he was just way more confident in himself than he should have been, and unfortunately for him, he ended up paying for it by getting submitted by Jordan Leavitt later in that first round. Claudio Puelles, like I said, coming off the Ultimate Fighter of Latin America, won 3 fights on the show. There are a couple fights where he was able to, most of the fights, he was dragging the fights to the ground, either submitting or TKOing these guys on the ground, or even winning decisions by just grinding these guys out. And then eventually getting knocked out by Martin Bravo in the finale. One thing I will say, though, is that Puelles does have a better striking game than Leavitt. And almost anybody has a better striking game than Leavitt. But it's good enough that he should be able to kind of touch up Leavitt on the feet. Now, the best part about Puelles here is that he does have a solid jiu-jitsu background himself. Like, I was trying to creep his Instagram page, and the last time I saw he has a brown belt from, 2018. So I'd be surprised if he's not a black belt by now, unless he had all these injuries kind of keeping him outside of the cage or outside of the training room. But it seems to be training on a regular basis. A lot of wrestling, a lot of grappling. That's kind of been his forte throughout his MMA career. So which leads me to believe that he should be able to hang with Jordan Leavitt on the ground here. Now, I think that Puelles wants to play this safe as possible and keep it on the feet and actually get his work done up there. But even if it does drag to the ground, I don't think it's going to be as one-sided as a minus 200 indicates for Jordan Leavitt. Which is why I actually like Claudio Puelles here as the underdog. I think he can make it very competitive on the ground, and I think even if when it's on the feet, it should be one-sided traffic with Claudio Puelles landing the better of the strikes. Not to mention, my guy Puelles has moved his training camp over there to Sanford MMA to really round out his striking, which is probably the weakest part of his game, which is why Martin Bravo was able to knock him out, which is why Felipe Silva was having the success that he was on the feet. Now, if Puelles can kind of change his fortunes and fix that part of his game, he's going to have a lot of success, especially in this fight against Jordan Leavitt, who in my opinion is just a one-dimensional fighter. Now, you can be very good in that one dimension, right? If you're just a very good jiu-jitsu player and you're good enough to get fights to the ground. Apparently Leavitt has a little bit of a wrestling background from high school, and it's been good enough for him to go 8-0 at this point in time. He is going to eventually run into some trouble. Perfect case, Mr. Kron Gracie, right? Kron Gracie was so one-dimensional with his MMA game, where it was just, I want to get you to the ground, I'm going to get your back, and I'm eventually going to submit you. Unless you're not able to get him down. And then you have to deal with Cub Swanson on the feet, and then you're going to have mad trouble on the feet trying to get the fight to the ground and taking all the damage that you're going to be taking. I don't think that Puelles' striking is to the level of Cub Swanson at this point in time, but I think it's serviceable enough for him to, land the damage on Jordan Leavitt and really make it tough for him. There's that one fight from February of 2020 of Jordan Leavitt that really rubbed me the wrong way. Like, he just did not look good on the feet at all. Horrible striking technique, horrible work all around, but where he shines is that grappling game and that jiu-jitsu game. So more often than not, he's lucky that he's able to drag it into that realm and actually pull off most of these submissions and these finishes the way that he is. So I ultimately will go with Claudio Puelles. I'll go with him to win either by KO or decision. Ultimately, I'll go with him to win by KO in the first round. You know what? No, I'll call it KO in the third round, as I think that Leavitt is going to continue to struggle to get this fight to the ground. The later it gets, I think it's going to be even harder for him. And then ultimately, I think we'll see Puelles kind of overwhelm him on the feet and then TKO him. So I'll go Puelles, round 3 KO. And last thing I'll say about this, people might think that's a possible round 3 prop spot. Depending on what the odds are, if it's better than like plus 1,500 or something like that, I might poke it a little bit myself. But just putting a gun to my head, I'm trying to figure this matchup out. I do see Puelles winning, and I will take him to win by third round TKO. Yusuf Zalal versus Sean Woodson. We got minus 190 on Woodson and plus 165 on Yusuf Zalal. And let's start off on the Sean Woodson side, who did take his first ever pro MMA loss last time around as a minus 500 favorite against Julian Rosa. Now, that was a fight where he had a lot of success in that first round. Julian Rosa started to pour it on in the second round, but we did see a lot of good work from Woodson in that second round regardless. But in that third round, it seemed like that pace and that pressure of Julian Rosa really started to catch up to Sean Woodson. And hence why Julian Rosa was able to kind of hurt him and then eventually lock up that dart stroke and get that finish. Beautiful, beautiful work from Julian Rosa. If I'm not mistaken, Rosa also took that fight on short notice, so good work from him to be able to get his hand raised, especially via finish and especially as a plus 400 underdog. Now, Sean Woodson's game is pretty much, reliant on his boxing heavy approach, but he does have a very sneaky knee up the middle that he's able to catch a lot of opponents with, especially considering that he's 6'2", and that definitely plays into this 145-pound division as one of the more weirder and lankier frames that people have to deal with. Like I said, Sean Woodson, primarily a boxer. I believe he had a pretty solid amateur boxing record, but unfortunately was involved in some sort of crazy accident, which kind of cut that short. And then eventually he ended up switching over to MMA. And then within the last couple of training camps, found himself aligning himself with James Krause, and that's where he's been able to really get his game going. Wins the Contender Series fight as a big underdog, plus 275 underdog there, and then comes in as pretty much a pick'em against Kyle Bochniak, and does a lot of good work there. Now, all three of his past three opponents have been able to take Woodson down, but Woodson has done a really good job in terms of getting back to his feet and nullifying the amount of control time and damage that his opponents are able to get off on him. Kyle Bochniak actually has the most amount of control time out of those three opponents, but the majority of that control time came up against the cage. But even during that those situations, we saw Bochniak struggle to get Sean Woodson down, and that's when Woodson was, one, defending the takedowns, but two, also dishing out the damage. So even though that Kyle Bochniak got close to 4 or 5 minutes of control time, pretty much none of that control time meant much at all, as Sean Woodson was able to kind of nullify what Kyle Bochniak was doing at that point in time. So I still do think that Sean Woodson has a lot of good things to bring to the table here, even though he's coming off a loss in his last fight. He's 28 years old, so he's still working on his game and truly rounding it out. And obviously having a mastermind like James Krause to kind of devise a game plan for you is really, really going to help, especially with that lanky frame and that great boxing work that he truly has. That should be able to help him, stay out of trouble against most opponents. Now, Yusuf Zalal is coming into this fight plus 165 dog, and he's actually on a 2-fight losing skid right now. He looked really good, since he made his debut against Austin Lingo. If I'm not mistaken, that was at UFC 248, February of 2020, and he was able to rattle off 5 UFC fights in, a year and a half? Just less than a year and a half, and he just remained very, very active, took a couple fights in short notice. Some of them paid off for him, some of them didn't, but losing to Ilia Topuria is not a bad thing at all. Topuria is going to be a very high-level fighter in the UFC within the next year or so, as we definitely seen Topuria go on a bit of a tear himself, obviously beating Yusuf Zalal in his UFC debut, and then going out there and finishing Damon Jackson in emphatic fashion in his second UFC fight. But with Yusuf Zalal, we're talking about a guy that's pretty much good everywhere, right? He has a decent submission game, has decent striking, and a decent wrestling game, but when he's not able to get his opponents down, and his opponents are better strikers than him, then he falls into some issues, right? He can beat guys like Austin Lingo. He can beat guys like Jordan Griffin, who he's able to take down and do some good work against. And even Peter Barrett, who I don't truly believe belongs inside the UFC. But then he runs into trouble against guys like Ilia Topuria and Seungwoo Choi. And the Seungwoo Choi one was very interesting because we had Yusuf Zalal coming in as a minus 245 favorite. There are a lot of sharp people that I saw on Choi in that fight, and Choi did a good job in terms of keeping the fight vertical. And then when it was vertical, he was the one getting his jab off, his combinations off, and really letting his Muay Thai game going, whereas Yusuf Zalal just seemed a little bit behind the 8 ball at the time and just couldn't really get his own game going. It seemed like a lot of it was centered around getting Choi down, and then once Choi was not going down without a fight, it didn't seem like Zalal had much other options in terms of truly getting anything else going. It didn't even seem like he had a plan B, to be honest. So with Sean Woodson, Sean Woodson might give up a takedown or two, but I believe in his ability to get back to his feet, to truly get his boxing and his jab game going. That's really going to stifle Yusuf Zalal. He has a 7-inch reach advantage, which I think he's going to take complete advantage of, especially with that beautiful jab that he has. That's going to keep Zalal on the outside. If Zalal is unable to take Sean Woodson down, things get very hairy, and I think it's going to be very tough for him to get Woodson down. And even if he does get him down, I don't think he's going to be able to keep him down. I think Woodson is the much better striker, and again, with that long, lanky reach, he's going to be able to keep Yusuf on the outside and nullify the amount of damage that Zalal is going to be able to do, especially whenever he tries to close the distance to 1, get his own strikes off inside the pocket, and 2, obviously try to engage in the clinch to try to get the fight to the ground. I do like Woodson here. I was leaning Zalal very heavily pre-tape, especially because the last thing that we do remember from Sean Woodson was him losing to a guy like Julian Rosa, but we got to give Rosa some due, right? The guy's been around for a while. He's a wily veteran. He has a lot of skills, especially that pressure that he's able to put on his opponents, and that's not really how Zalal fights, right? Is Zalal going to adapt a new type of fighting style to go out there and beat a guy like Sean Woodson? Maybe. Even him, he's only 24 years old. He's 4 years younger than Sean Woodson. He has a great training camp behind him too, headed by Mark Montoya over there at Factory X, and that could definitely help him as well. But I do think that the raw skills that we have here with Sean Woodson are going to be enough for him to, 1, keep this fight vertical, and 2, keep Zalal on the outside with his beautiful boxing techniques. So ultimately, I'm going to go with Sean Woodson to win this fight via decision. I do think Yusuf Zalal is very, very durable. He'll be able to take all the shots that Woodson's throwing at him, but unfortunately, he's not going to be able to get his own game going. So I'm going to take Sean Woodson to win this fight via decision. Marina Moroz versus Manon Fiorot. We got minus 165 on the sophomore Manon Fiorot and plus 145 on Marina Moroz. Let's start off with Moroz, who's on a 2-fight winning streak right now, and she's actually approaching that winning streak with a way that she hasn't really won her prior fights in the UFC, which is a grapple-heavy approach, right? The Sabina Mazo fight, she was able to ground it time and time again, really grinding out Sabina Mazo, and we've seen most recently from Sabina that she truly does struggle with fighters that decide to bring the fight to the ground and don't give her the space that she needs to actually get her striking going. And then obviously the Mayra Bueno Silva fight for Marina Moroz. She grounds her in the first 2 rounds, but in that 3rd round, I don't know if she was it was gassing or what it was, but Bueno Silva really started to put it on her. Bueno Silva was first pretty much at all times in terms of starting the combinations and starting the striking exchanges, and that's where I truly think was really putting Marina Moroz on her back foot, not to mention the calf kicks that Bueno Silva was getting off, and the power in which she was landing on Moroz was really starting to show. Luckily for Moroz, she was able to at least squeak out those first 2 rounds, so she was able to get her hand raised that night, but it definitely came from the grappling approach, right? She has a good enough volume and striking volume on the feet to kind of lull her opponents into thinking that it's going to be a striking battle, and then eventually she drags fights to the ground, and that's where she, or at least in her last 2 fights, that's where she was able to really get her hand raised after, accruing some control time and obviously staying busy enough on top so that the referee doesn't really stand them up. Now, Moroz, the way that she matches up with Fiorot here, it's almost similar to the Bueno Silva fight, but I do think that we'll see Fiorot be more assertive, and I think we'll see her actually go first more often, not in those combinations, and not just wait for Moroz like Bueno Silva seemed to be in those first 2 rounds. We'll talk about Fiorot right now in terms of what she brings to the table. She got into MMA primarily as a kickboxer and a Muay Thai fighter, and she did lose her first ever fight to Bellator's Leah McCourt. I believe that was over for the Cage Warriors promotion at the time, but very, very close fight. McCourt did a good job in terms of grinding the fight when it was required, but Fiorot did a good job of getting back to her feet and dishing out damage on the feet. But it seemed like, I don't know if it was a hometown rub for Leah McCourt, but also it seemed like the judges were kind of scoring the takedowns a little bit more than the damage that Fiorot was dishing out in that fight. I don't really want to rate the competition that Fiorot was really fighting on the UAE Warriors promotion, but she was going out there and doing what she needed to do, not to mention getting pretty much finishes in every single one of those fights, but she showed a good skill set all around. Obviously, her primary focuses are striking, Muay Thai, kickboxing, that's where she thrives, but we have seen her land takedowns when required, seen her, flow on top pretty well, but obviously when you get to the UFC, it's a completely different situation and a completely different different level of competition that you're going to be going up against. So we have to ensure that she's actually going out there and making the improvements that's required to be successful inside the UFC. The fight against Victoria Leonardo, she comes in as a minus 230 favorite, so it's almost as if the writing's on the wall that this is almost a layup of a fight for her to get comfortable inside the UFC with starting off with a win, and not just a win but a dominant win by getting a finish in that second round with a beautiful head kick and then following up with some combinations afterwards to get Victoria Leonardo out there. But the one thing that I really liked in that fight was like her assertiveness, right? She was the one going forward. She was the one kind of throwing strikes, and she was calculated about it. She wasn't over patient, but she was patient enough that she was waiting to find the shots. Her check right hook was a beautiful look for her in terms of just setting up her combinations. Whenever Leonardo would try to close the distance, you'd see that left and right come, especially with that right hook that was doing a lot of damage. And I think that's where Moroz is going to start to fall into some issues. Moroz might be able to make this a much closer fight than it should be, just based off her volume and ability to stay active alone. But I do think that Fiorot should be able to go out there and land the more impactful shots, which should ultimately actually, have the judges kind of favor her, especially when this fight is going into, if it goes to the judges' scorecards, which I think it will. Moroz is a very durable opponent, so I do think that she'll be able to take what Fiorot is dishing out, but I do think that she's going to have a tough time dealing with the heavy strikes that are going to be coming back her way from Fiorot. The one thing I will say about this, the ATT trained Moroz might be able to develop or devise a game plan that's going to be perfect to fight a girl like Fiorot, and I think it has to be centered around what made her successful in her last two fights. It's the grappling. If she's able to get Fiorot down, if she's able to kind of get that part of her game going, she might be able to steal 2 rounds here. That's the issue. We just haven't seen Fiorot truly challenged in that department. Outside of her first ever pro MMA fight against Leah McCourt, and even with Victoria Leonardo, we did see Leonardo go for takedowns, but Fiorot saw them coming from a mile away, and she was able to stuff them. If Moroz, gets into that groove of striking and throwing out this volume, and then mixes in that double leg, is Fiorot going to be ready? Is her takedown defense going to be good enough? And also, is her get up game going to be good enough in terms of nullifying the amount of control time that Moroz is able to capitalize on? With that said, I don't think Moroz will be able to. I think that Fiorot is a very special talent. She's 31 years old, so she's pretty much getting close to where her peak is, and I do like what we see from her. She is a vicious striker. She throws a lot of heat in her shots, and a lot of opponents kind of wilt under it, and I think that Moroz is going to start to feel it too the longer that this fight goes. Again, I'm not 100% sure if Fiorot will actually get the finish here, which is ultimately why I'll take Fiorot to win this fight via decision, but the only thing that gives me a slight pause is if Moroz doesn't really react too bad to the shots that are going to be thrown her way, and she's still going out there and throwing out the volume that she's known to throw. Even if she gets her takedown stuffed, if she keeps that volume on, if she keeps her leg kicks going, if she kind of keeps a combination and a pressure and a pace on Fiorot, it could cause Fiorot some issues here. I know there is a narrative out there to go and fade girls like Fiorot who are, either making their UFC debut off the Contender Series or are, only a fight or two into the UFC career, and we still have some question marks about them. But I do think that Fiorot has something special about her that should make her successful enough to at least reach the top 10 of this division. So I do think she beats Moroz. I think she's going to have the much better, more impactful strikes, and I think ultimately she'll be able to get her hand raised via decision. Mason Jones versus Alan Patrick. We got minus 290 on Mason Jones and plus 245 on Alan Patrick. Let's start off on the Patrick side of things, who's on a 2-fight skid, or a 2-fight losing skid at this point in time, coming off of losses to a finish to Scott Holtzman and then a decision loss to Bobby Green last time around. And now everybody seems to be figuring out what the Alan Patrick approach is, and it's a little bit rudimentary in a sense, which I kind of find hard to say, especially with a guy that I used to back in the day, especially as a lock in the night play. I believe the last one I did was the Damir Hadzovic fight, which is the last fight he has actually won. Now, if you're able to keep the fight vertical and you're able to deal with the herky-jerky approach of the striking of Alan Patrick, you should have a pretty good, easy time, right? He mainly has a front kick up the middle, blitz attacks from the outside, but outside of that, no real technical boxing or technical striking from Alan Patrick, because the main thing he wants to do is try to drag this fight to the ground and then just smother you with his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu. But the issue is, it seems like in his fights, at least most recently, is he doesn't do the best job in terms of controlling his opponent. opponents. And Mason Jones does a really good job in terms of, never settling on the bottom and just popping right back to his feet, as we saw in the Mike Davis fight. Alan Patrick has moved his training camp from Fusion XL in Florida to, I believe, Sanford MMA, which is also in Florida, but it does give him a huge crop of training partners and great coaches to go out there and try to hone his skill. But then you got to bring into the age into the equation here, right? He's 37 years old. How much improvements can he truly make after changing camps after this amount of time? And is it really going to have an effect on his approach here? I don't think that he's going to be able to go out there and shore up his game, most notably his cardio issues that he seems to have later in fights. And that's where I think that Mason Jones is going to start to, pull away with this fight the more that he's able to keep this fight on the feet. Mason Jones shows some great things in that Mike Davis fight. He was a plus 135 dog going into his UFC debut against Mike Davis. And if I'm not mistaken, they had actually received the fight of the night honors that night because that fight was absolutely bonkers. Plenty of successful moments from either guy, big strikes, knockdowns, stuns, all that type of shit was going down in that fight with Mason Jones. Mason showed a great chin. He was at a huge speed discrepancy against Mike Jones, but Mike Davis. I want to say Mike Jones because of the rapper from back in the day. But he was dealing with a huge speed discrepancy against Mike Davis. But his chin held up and he was able to kind of throw back in response to Mike Davis and land some good shots of his own. Davis landed several takedowns in that fight. I believe it was 3 or 4 takedowns that he actually landed. But he only accumulated about 50 seconds of control time because Mason Jones, as soon as his butt hit the ground, he was right back up to his feet because he was not settling on bottom. That's something that you hear like Paul Felder say a lot, right? The best takedown defense is, okay, even if you get taken down, just don't settle. Don't allow the opponent to claim full guard and start to control you from there. Just get your butt right back to your feet. And that's exactly what Mason Jones is able to do. Before coming to the UFC, he was the champ over there in Cage Warriors. He won the lightweight title, and then right after that, they threw him into a champ title fight in the welterweight division. If I'm not mistaken, it was actually vacant at the time, and Mason Jones was able to capture it, and then he comes right on over to the UFC. I don't put too much credit into that, considering the fact that he never really defended either title. But what we do see in those fights is just grit, determination, and great combinations. Not to mention the fact that the guy has a black belt in judo, a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and he can definitely crack on the feet because he has some good combinations and he has some good power as well to go with it. In this fight against Alan Patrick, I think his takedown defense is going to very much hold up here, and that's going to force Alan Patrick to strike, and that's not what you want to do against a heavy hitter like Mason Jones, who's able to really put it on his opponents and really hurt them. I'm kind of stumped in terms of Mason Jones by knockout or by decision, but I am actually leaning the knockout a little bit more, as I do think that Alan Patrick is just not the greatest nail, but he's a great hammer, right? Unfortunately for him, Mason Jones is going to be the hammer in this fight, and I do completely understand why the steam is coming in on Mason Jones, as he has a lot more of a well-rounded game, 11-year youth advantage, and not to mention his ability to just keep coming forward, take the damage, and his takedown defense, not to mention his get-up game, is going to be a little bit too much for Alan Patrick here. So Jones is definitely one of my more confident picks on the card. I do think he goes out there and cruises against Alan Patrick, and I do think he actually gets him out of there probably in the second round, if not the third round. So this could potentially be a third round prop for this fight that we could potentially be looking at. But I do think that Mason Jones's overall game, his ability to dish out damage, take damage, and then get back to his feet, even if his opponents get him to the ground, should help him, put the beating on Alan Patrick and really showcase that Patrick is, he's past his prime, 37 years old, I believe going on 38 this year, and even changing camps over to Sanford MMA can't help everybody. You guys know I'm a big Sanford MMA guy, I'm a big Fortis MMA guy, but there are some fighters that are just too far past their peak and their prime to go out there and try to, rejuvenate their career by changing up their camps, and I don't think that's going to help Patrick here. So the line might seem a little bit too wide to some people, but I do think that Jones has all the chops to go out there and put a beating on Alan Patrick and finish him. So I'll go with Mason Jones to win this fight by second round TKO, but I will be sprinkling that third round prop too, because we do know that Alan Patrick has some cardio issues of his own, and you don't want to have that against a guy like Mason Jones who could definitely put it on you. So once again, I'll go second round TKO, but this is definitely live for a third round TKO prop for Mason Jones. Francisco Trinaldo versus Muslim Salikhov. We got minus 260 on the Russian. We got plus 200 on Masaranduba. Francisco Trinaldo. So let's start off on the Trinaldo side, who is actually on a 3-fight winning streak, and I think that's going to be surprising to some people considering that he's 42 years old, but he just hasn't been competing that often, and that, again, it might surprise people that he actually has a win over Bobby Green in that amount of time. Bobby Green has had several fights since that fight, so obviously he's probably leveled up in that amount of time, but Masaranduba is just slowly being that guy that just keeps putting together a couple win streaks, not to mention he could probably be on a 6-fight winning streak if he actually got the nod in that Alexander Hernandez fight, as a lot of people thought he should have. The Bobby Green fight was close though, so that probably could have gone either way. But I do think the the Makdessi and Herbert fights were pretty clear-cut wins from. Obviously, he knocked out Herbert in a pretty back-and-forth fight. Herbert was having a lot of success in that fight, and then John Makdessi just could not get anything going, and Masaranduba was pretty much able to just stalk him for the majority of that fight and land his strikes at will. The issue here, though, is why is he a plus 200 underdog? I just don't understand that. I think the line is just completely way off here. With Muslim Salikhov, you're talking about a guy who is obviously Russian and probably has that Russian tax on him, and if he didn't have that Russian background, or if his name was Chris White or something like that, this fight would probably be much closer lined. But Salikhov is just not that impressive to me. I just don't understand what people truly see in him. Now, the age obviously is an issue here for Francisco Trinaldo, or people will make it an issue. He's 42 years old, but you're talking about Muslim Salikhov, who's coming up on 37 a couple days after this fight actually goes down, so he's no spry chicken himself. But when you truly start to break down this fight and look at the tape on these guys, you just don't understand why this line is as wide as it is. Salikhov, very low volume. Trinaldo, quite low volume himself, but has some pretty good power in his hands. But Salikhov, he seems to rely heavily on big moments that don't happen that often to truly sway the judges, right? For example, the Laureano Staropoli fight, for the majority of it, it's kind of a stalemate, right? Salikhov is getting off some good strikes, but it was really that second round where he's able to kind of get away and really land a big strike on Staropoli and hurt him and get close to finishing him. But outside of that, both guys are just trading strikes and being very low volume, and there's not much to really judge out there. The Elizeu Zaleski fight, I thought he lost that fight, just as a lot of people thought that Zaleski actually won that fight. So, another questionable fight for him there. But then he's able to, knock out Ricky Rainey. He's able to knock out Nordine Taleb, so the judges don't actually get put into the situation there. Trinaldo did get dropped by Herbert a couple times in their fight, so maybe his durability is on the brink at this point in time. But for the majority of his career, the guy's been a tank, and his durability has been ironclad. And I think it should be able to hold up here against Muslim Salikhov, who, again, there aren't a whole lot of opportunities for him to get those moments that he needs to actually win these rounds. And Trinaldo could actually be the one that actually finds those moments himself. This is the same Muslim Salikhov that went out there and got choked out by Alex Garcia 5 fights ago. Again, that was 5 fights ago. It was a long time ago. Could have been making improvements, but could also be regressing too, as the guy's close to being 37 years old at this point in time. He was a minus 220 favorite in the Alex Garcia fights, yet he goes out there and gets choked out. So I do think that Trinaldo, I'm not saying he should be favored, but I think this fight should be closer to a pick'em, and I'm ultimately going to be going on the Trinaldo side here, as I do think he has a hell of a lot of value, and not to mention, I think this fight goes the full 15 minutes, and I'd rather be holding that plus 200 ticket compared to a minus 260 ticket in a fight that I expect to be super, super close and could possibly go either way. I could see the bigger moments happening for Trinaldo, as he, seems to go forward a little bit more and seems to land with a little bit more power, and that could possibly cause Salikhov some issues here. And as long as Trinaldo's chin isn't completely shot, as it seems like it might be, starting to deteriorate in that Jay Herbert fight. But the Jay Herbert fight, you're getting a guy that throws with more volume, which creates more opportunities for him to potentially rock, hurt, drop, and possibly finish his opponents. We just don't get that from Salikhov. So that's why I like Trinaldo here. I think that he can make this fight close, and he's going to look closer to a pick'em, or maybe even a favorite once this fight is all said and done. So I'm going to go with Trinaldo. I think he can pull off the upside here, and I think people blindly putting Salikhov into their parlays, just like they're putting Makwan and Amirkhani in their parlays, they're going to be surprised as, one, how close this fight could be, and two, the parlay might get busted. Let's be honest. Very, very close fight. A lot of live dogs on this, and a lot of good big live dogs too. So I'm going to be going with Trinaldo. I think he pulls off the upset, and I'm going to take him to win this fight via decision. Ilir Latifi versus Tanner Boser. We got plus 170 on the sledgehammer Ilir Latifi and minus 200 on Tanner Boser. Let's start off on the Latifi side, who's on a very rough skid right now. 0-3 in his last 3 fights. Obviously 0-1 in his heavyweight run inside the UFC. He did lose to Derek Lewis last time around in a very, kind of a close fight. We saw him successful with his takedown in the second round where he was able to grind that out. And then in the third round, did secure a takedown again, had some good control time, but Derek Lewis did manage to find his way back to his feet, as Derek Lewis always ends up doing, and he was able to put together enough damage against Ilir Latifi that he was able to get his hand raised via decision that night. But that was February of 2020. It's been a while since we've seen Latifi inside the cage, and that is a little bit of a concern, but Latifi is a veteran at this point in time. 22 fights. The guy's 37 years old. He's pretty much seen it all at this point. So I'm not going to say if he loses this fight, it's because of the layoff, but that is something definitely to note here. Latifi seems to split most of his time between All Stars training camp over there in Sweden and American Top Team down there in Florida. I was trying to, stalk him on the IG and figure out where he was doing the majority of his camp, but he's just putting up model shots of himself on a fucking horse. So it's really tough to tell where he was spending the majority of his time for this training camp. But we pretty much can tell what the stylistic matchup or the clash in this matchup is going to be, right? Latifi's going to try to get this fight to the ground just as he's been able to try to do over his last couple fights. And Tanner Boser is going to try to stay on his bicycle, get his leg kicks going, stay on the outside, and try to, defend the takedowns of Latifi. The issue here is, though, we haven't really seen Boser completely challenged in the grappling realm for over 4 or 5 years. Definitely not in the UFC. Most of his fights and most of his opponents have wanted to fight him in a striking battle, and he is able to beat the majority of those fights or those fighters in the striking realm. Knocking out his last 2 wins. Obviously lost to Andrei Arlovski last time around, but that was a very weird performance from Tanner Boser. We see slightly more volume from him often, right? Or at least enough volume that it's clear that he won the rounds. But he was fighting very, very close to Andrei Arlovski. Arlovski seemed to land the more significant strikes, which ultimately swayed the referees or the judges in his realm. But I do think that if we see Boser go out there and learn the lesson from that fight, he should go out there and throw with a little bit more volume, especially his leg kicks, which has been very, very helpful for him throughout his the majority of his career. He actually has more fights than Ilir Latifi, which is kind of surprising, but Boser has been active for a long time. He's been fighting a lot over there in the Russian scene. He has a couple fights on the West Coast and Canada too, but since coming to the UFC, he's put together a 3-2 record, but you can't really be mad at the 2 losses. Well, you can kind of be mad at the Andrei Arlovski loss, right? That was one where it felt like he just didn't go. Right, something that's similar to one of his training partners, KB Buller, who obviously went to a decision against Andreas Mihalaitis a couple weeks ago. There was just no urgency, and that's kind of what we saw from Tanner Boser last time around against Andrei Arlovski. And then obviously loses to Cyril Gane in his second fight in the UFC. Can't really bang on him too much in that fight, especially as he was coming in as a plus 470 underdog. But when Tanner Boser wins, he's the one kind of going first. He's the one throwing volume, combinations, a lot of leg kicks, and just staying on his bicycle. Seems like he's going to have the better cardio here with Ilir Latifi, who seems to just completely gas out, especially if he's not able to complete takedowns. But that's the question mark, right? The last time we saw Tanner Boser have to deal with the grapple heavy approach, didn't look the greatest, right? Like, he's getting taken down, he's getting controlled, doesn't really have a get-up game. And you're going to have a very thick Ilir Latifi on top of you, Tanner Boser. You're going to need to find a way to get back to your feet and then start dishing out some damage. Otherwise, we'll see Latifi grind this fight out. So by no means am I comfortable with minus 200 on Tanner Boser in this fight, even though I do think he wins this fight. I think he goes out there. I think he gets his footwork going. I think he stays on the outside. We do have to remember we're back at the apex for this fight, so there might be a little bit of, or less real estate to actually work with for Tanner Boser if he wants to stay away from the grapple heavy approach of Ilir Latifi. But I do think that we'll see him successful enough in terms of, at least notching 2 rounds where he's outstriking Latifi and then eventually getting that decision victory. It's just, how successful will Latifi be with that grappling game? And we just haven't seen anything from Boser inside the UFC that indicates that he's going to be able to stop what Latifi's bringing to him. And which is why I'm ultimately going to be staying off of betting Tanner Boser here, especially at minus 200. If we're getting closer to minus 125, minus 130 for Tanner Boser, I'd feel a little bit more obligated to go out there and put the money there, because I do think he's the better fighter, especially at this stage of both of their careers. We're talking about a Tanner Boser who's 8 years younger than him at this point in time. And again, much better striker, much better volume, volume, much better gas tank, much better footwork. And then Ilir Latifi, obviously decent power in his hands, but his grapple-heavy approach usually is what gets him his wins in his fights. And, if he's able to do that here against Tanner Boser, he should win. Just not 100% sure if he'll be able to. That's the question mark, because we just haven't seen Tanner Boser have to deal with it. So with that said, I'll still go with Tanner Boser. I'm going to say that he, evades the grapple-heavy approach for the majority of this fight, gets his kicking game going, gets his combinations going, gets his footwork and ability to stay away from the big power of Latifi, and then ends up pulling out a decision victory in this fight and getting back onto the winning track, especially after that dismal performance against Andrei Arlovski last time around. So once again, I will go with Tanner Boser to win this fight via decision. Montana De La Rosa versus Ariane Lipski. We got minus 280 on Montana De La Rosa and plus 220 on Ariane Lipski. Also, you can get De La Rosa around minus 250, minus 260. There's even one spot, I believe FanDuel at the time of this recording, that currently still has around minus 200. And I think that's an absolute gaffe on their part, assuming and actually just taking into consideration how the rest of the bookies are actually landing this fight. So I really like Montana De La Rosa in this fight. She's a woman that I've actually been going out there and backing on several occasions. And, I don't think I have a bias on her per se, but I like the fact that she has a really good wrestling background. And more often than not, she's able to implement it against her opponents and be very successful with it. In the Nadia Kasim fight, I was able to back her as a lock of the night play there, and that was very easy to catch. I did have her as a slight underdog in the Andrea Lee fight. That one didn't really pan out to the best of its abilities. Had her again as a lock of the night play against Mara Romero Barella. That obviously cashes. Backed her ever so slightly against Viviane Araujo. That one whiffs. Backed her slightly against Mayra Bueno Silva. That one goes to a draw, so we get a push there. And now we get another opportunity to back her as a possible lock of the night play, considering she is a little bit chalky and a little bit juiced at this point in time. But once you run the tape, you completely understand why, and you will completely understand why that it might be worth biting on the chalk in this particular matchup. Like I said, De La Rosa, primarily a grappler that likes to take her opponents to the ground, grind them out, look for submissions at times, even look for some ground and pound at times, but she does a good job in terms of remaining active enough when she's on top of her opponents so that the referee doesn't actually stand them up. She's not really a lay-in player. She likes to control, she likes to dominate, she likes to go position over submission, which is great, especially especially in terms of neutralizing her opponent's resistance and jiu-jitsu and ability to get back to her feet, which is why I think that she is rightfully favored in this matchup, right? I do like what we see from De La Rosa in terms of the ability to get fights to the ground, close the distance, and not to mention the durability. In her last two fights alone, she's fought much more dominant and efficient strikers than she's going up against here with Ariane Lipski, and we saw her, her durability pay off very, very well. Now, even though she's 0-1-1 in her last two fights, I do believe that this is a perfect matchup for her to go out there and right that wrong and get back onto the winning track, especially against a girl like Ariane Lipski, who just doesn't show the greatest takedown defense. Now, in terms of statistics, we're talking about 45% takedown defense for Ariane Lipski, but it just does not look good. Now, she seems to have tried to revamp her camp and revamp her approach to fights by moving on over to an American Top Team down there in Coconut Creek, Florida. But I just don't know how much that's truly going to help in terms of your actual takedown defense. You can drill it all you want, but I do think that once she actually steps in the cage there and fights a woman like Montana De La Rosa, it's going to be a little bit harder for her to actually get her game going. In terms of the metrics here, we're talking about Lipski, who's coming in at 5'6", I believe it is. 5'6" with a 67-inch reach. And then on the flip side for De La Rosa, we actually have 5'7" with a 68-inch reach. So slightly bigger opponent in De La Rosa, but we do know that her grappling roots will definitely help her to win this fight. Lipski, she's one of the few fighters that can go out there and go to a decision against a girl like Isabella Dupadua, who took the fight on less than 36 to 48 hours notice. Not to mention she completed plenty of takedowns against Ariane Lipski in that amount of time. But But again, you got to put into question the cardio and the readiness of DePaula, because if I'm not mistaken, we had Lipski going up against a completely different opponent, and then on weigh-in day, you had DePaula jump in. Then she goes out there and gets a beautiful near bar victory over Luana Carolina, and then comes back and gets completely dominated by Antonina Shevchenko last time around, and we continue to see the flaws in her grappling approach. She doesn't really seem to have much off of her back, right? Take that knee bar out of the way in terms of the Carolina fight. That was a very weird situation, very weird positioning, and not often that you actually see fights get into that position. And I'd be very surprised if she was successfully able to get Montana De La Rosa into a similar position. I'm not too worried about the jiu-jitsu that's going to be coming off the back of Ariane Lipski, as it seems, non-existent, to be honest. And the Queen of Violence, or Violence Queen, whatever you want to call her nickname, she's not transferring that from the KSW days over to her UFC days, right? To go out there and lose to Joanne Calderwood and Molly McCann as minus 250 plus favorites, not a good look, especially the Molly McCann fight. Molly did a really good job in terms of mixing up her grab or her striking, in and out movement, staying out of the way of the big shots of Lipski, and then ending pretty much every single round with the takedown to kind of cement that round for herself. Was a very good approach and game plan. I do think that De La Rosa is slowly getting more and more comfortable in her new home in Colorado with the guys over there at Team Elevation. And I think they're going to be able to elevate her game to the next level, especially with the win here against Ariane Lipski. So once again, I do think that the ability for De La Rosa to take damage en route to closing the distance and then eventually getting the fight to the ground is going to be her path to success in this fight against Ariane Lipski. I don't think that we'll see Lipski, shuck off too many takedowns or sprawl on too many takedowns. I think it's just a little bit too easy for her to get taken down, which is why I do think that De La Rosa, who's probably the best grappler that Lipski has faced in the UFC, I think it's going to be relatively easy for De La Rosa to drag this fight to the ground. I do believe in the cardio and the durability, especially of De La Rosa, to deal with the striking that Ariane Lipski is going to be putting onto her, and then eventually closing that distance and then getting this fight to the ground. I just don't see where Lipski truly wins this fight. Is she going to be able to stuff enough takedowns to truly get enough striking going on the feet? I don't think so. And that's where I think that De La Rosa will thrive. So I think De La Rosa gets a fight down time and time again. And I wouldn't be surprised to actually see her pull off a submission victory here. She does seek the submission every now and then against Mauro Bueno Silva. We did see her try to go for a couple arm triangle chokes, and they were close, but Bueno Silva had the correct defenses in terms of getting back to her feet and getting out of those bad positions. Does Lipski, though? I'm not 100% sure. Now, she hasn't been submitted inside the UFC, and I do think that she's going to, have some issues dealing with that here against De La Rosa. But I will go on the safer side. I'm going to go with De La Rosa by decision, but don't be surprised to see me with a small play on the submission prop, as I do think that's a very lucrative part of this fight that some people might be overlooking. So once again, I'm going to go with De La Rosa by decision, but again, I might sprinkle that submission prop once it does drop. Makwan Amirkhani versus Kamwala Kirk. We got minus 280 on Amirkhani, and we got plus 220 on the UFC newcomer Kamwala Kirk. Let's start off on the Makwan Amirkhani side, who is coming off a loss to Edson Barboza last time around, where he just seemed frozen on the feet, where really was not able to get much going on there, and Barboza was able to kind of tee off on him. Had a very dominant second round where he dropped Amirkhani a couple times, and then eventually got his hand raised via decision. Makwan Amirkhani, we know what his strengths are, right? His wrestling. He wants to get the fight to the ground. He wants to try to find that choke and eventually get that submission, just as he was able to do most recently against Chris Fishgold and Danny Hendry 2 and 4 fights ago. But when he's not able to get those takedowns going and he is outstruck on the feet, he is in for a world of trouble, just like he was against Shane Burgos and Edson Barboza. So he's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. One of them even stretching as far back as the Jason Knight times. Shout out to the Hick Diaz. It's been a long time since we've heard from Jason Knight, who I believe is doing some good things over there in bare knuckle boxing. But that just goes to show how inactive Makwan has truly been over his last 5 fights. It seems like he's starting to, piece it together. Obviously, the Barboza fight was back in October, so he's taken roughly about 8 months off, and he's back in the cage now. I do believe he was scheduled to go up against somebody else. I just can't recall off the top of my head, but he does draw Kamala Kirk here, who looks to go out there and pull off a big upset, which I think he is highly capable of doing in this fight against Makwan. Just finishing off with Makwan, it seemed like he did the majority of his camp over there in Finland, if I'm not mistaken. There are times where he goes over there to SPG in Ireland to try to work with John Kavanagh and get his game going over there. But it seems like his game is pretty much the same from the majority of the time that we've known him. A decent striking game, nothing to run home about, or write home about, I should say. But his best work does come when he's able to secure takedowns and really kind of pressure his opponents and get his game going that way. Kamala Kirk, on the other hand, you're talking about a BJJ black belt, 5 out of his 11 wins coming via submission. But the guy is very talented. He trains at a Fight Ready, obviously, made famous by Santino DeFranco, the head coach over there, especially working with Eddie Cha as well, Henry Cejudo, the Pitbull brothers, Tracy Cortez, Eric Anders started working over there recently too. So there's a lot of good guys coming out of Fight Ready, and Kamala Kirk is definitely one of those guys. Now, just to put into perspective what the UFC thought of Kamala Kirk, when they put him out to the Contender Series against Billy Quarantillo, the guy was a minus 290 favorite against Billy Q. Minus 290. They had a very dominant first round, just as pretty much everybody seems to have over Billy Q the first time around. But then Billy just starts to pick it up in that second round, starts to get into your face, and really, his durability seems to shine through, which is why he's able to go out there and really break his opponents and then finish him late, just as he did with Kamala Kirk. I believe in that second or third round, he actually ended up finishing him. Then he goes out there and loses a very close split decision to Bruno Souza, a fight that was primarily taking place on the feet, and it was Souza's karate style, his counter style that prevailed that night. But again, it was a split decision, very, very close fight that possibly could have gone Kamala Kirk's way, who was, in my opinion, controlling that fight with, just marching him down, landing his strikes. But it did seem like Souza was landing some very good and efficient strikes himself. So, again, the fight could have gone either way. Then he goes out there and springs 2 big KO wins in his next 2 fights. Goes out there and beats Guilherme Santos, knocks him out, and then makes Daniel Swain quit on the stool before heading into the third round. But again, he's expected to go out and win those fights. Minus 385 against Santos and minus 450 against Daniel Swain. So the kid's talented. He's definitely very talented, which is why it kind of, mystifies me as to why he's such a big underdog here against Makwan Amirkhani. I think that Kirk is definitely a better striker than Makwan, and I think that his BJJ black belt should help him kind of survive / to be able to get back to his feet, against a guy like Makwan who kind of needs to get that game going to be successful. If he's not, then he's going to be in for some trouble. And I think that Kirk can absolutely put on a bit of a pace on him and a striking style that's going to cause Makwan some problems. So don't go out there and blindly bet Makwan Amirkhani here because he's going up against a guy that was, 2-2 in his last 4 fights and couldn't cut it on the Contender Series. Let's not forget it was Billy Quarantillo that he's going up against. He actually has a win over Kevin Krumon in the regional scene as well. Again, like I said, he was a minus 290 favorite against Billy Quarantillo. So I think going into that fight, Mick Maynard, Sean Shelby, Dana White, they're probably looking at Kirk as the guy that's probably going to get his hand raised. Not to mention, Kirk had a bunch of people come from Hawaii to support him in Las Vegas for that fight, thinking that he was pretty much a shoo-in to win that fight. But Billy Q spoils the party, and Kamala Kirk goes down the ladder a little bit further and eventually has to make his UFC debut a couple years later. I like Kirk here. I really do like Kirk here. I do think he has the chops to go out there and pull off the upset on Amirkhani, and I think the absolute value here is on Kirk too. So I'm going to go with Kirk. And I might pick him to win by decision. I'm still trying to figure that out. I think Makwan does have some cardio issues that he's going to have to address, especially if his opponents, if they start to target the body. We do see Amirkhani really start to slow down. And Kirk, it seemed like a headhunter in the Santos fight. Hopefully, the Fight Ready guys can kind of get him shaped up and ready to go, especially, working the body of Amirkhani, and then it should start to pay off for him later in the fight. The last thing I'll say about Kirk, he seemed to have a bit of a cardio dump or whatever the fuck it was, but also, mixed in with the style that Billy Quarantillo brings, but his output and his efficiency seemed to drop off a cliff about halfway through that second round in the Quarantillo fight. But since then, he's looked great, right? Hasn't really had much of a cardio drop-off. Obviously, the Bruno Souza fight is the only one we see go the full 3 rounds. And then the Daniel Swain fight, not much of a resistance, considering that Swain, a veteran, obviously, but has quit on the stool a couple of times now, especially on one of the bigger stages when he's seeing him on the Contender Series, and then obviously most recently as the main eventer on the LFA scene. but I do think that Kirk has some good chops to go out there and spring the upset. So I'm going to go with Kirk. I'm going to actually be keeping an eye on that round 3 prop, as well as I do think that could possibly be very lucrative in the spot. But sorry. Excuse me. I'll ultimately be going with Kamala Kirk to win this fight via decision, and he could possibly be the dog of the night play for this card, as I do think that a lot of people are going to be undervaluing him coming in as a short notice guy and being, seeing the odds at minus 300-ish for a Mach 1. A lot of people are just going to think that Mach 1's going to go out there and steamroll this guy. I think they're going to be in for a bit of a rude awakening, as I do think that Kirk has all the striking chops and the BJJ chops to go out there and make this a striking battle, which should ultimately favor Kirk and his power and his speed. I got Kirk. Again, either late finish or a decision win for Mr. Kamwala Kirk. Antonio Arroyo versus Tom Breese. We got minus 245 on Tom Breese, and we got plus 205 on Antonio Arroyo. Both guys coming off of very underwhelming performances. Let's start off on the Antonio Arroyo side, who's on a 2-fight skid in the UFC, and not to mention he's 0-2 in the UFC, right? He hasn't actually gotten a UFC victory to boot. He was successful on the Contender Series, but unfortunately has fell flat in his debut fight against Andre Muniz, where he just couldn't get anything really going. And then obviously the Duran Win fight, where it seemed like the gas tank was really starting to catch up with him. And Duran Win, who also had cardio issues in that fight, seemed to just be more successful with landing takedowns. Antonio Arroyo was pretty much backing up the entire time, always staying on the outside of the warning track, and that was a perfect way for Duran Win to kind of close the distance, push him up against the cage, clasp his hands behind his back, and then eventually land that takedown and get some good work from on top. Now, there were certain things that Arroyo did that were good in terms of rolling for a leg lock to try to create distance and eventually get back to his feet, but then it was like the bad fight IQ things, like not really trying to take command of the cage. And again, it's obviously easier said than done, so I don't want to give him too much flack there, but he just kept putting himself into positions that allowed Duran Win to be successful and allowed Duran Win to pull off the upset as a plus 160 dog. Now, when you looked at them like kind of facing off, right? You had a 6'3" guy in Antonio Arroyo and a 5'6" guy in Duran Win, and you thought it should have been a pretty one-sided fight, and that's exactly what the odds indicated too. But Antonio Arroyo shows he's not the brightest bulb in the division, and he was unfortunately on his back for the majority of that fight. His strengths are his striking, right? He is a really good striker, has some good power on his shots, but if he truly can get comfortable and he truly can get the space needed to operate, then he's going to fall into some issues, and that's where he ends up losing fights like he did in his last two. And obviously he's on the chopping block here, but he has a pretty stiff test ahead of him and Tom Breese, who's going to definitely be looking to bounce back after a tumultuous run, especially in his last 5, right? You're talking about a guy who's 2-3 in his last 5, and those losses were very underwhelming losses, albeit the Sean Strickland one, I'll give him a little bit more leeway for, considering how good Sean Strickland has looked as of late, and we know that Strickland is a very high-level opponent. But the Brendan Allen loss, he seemed to just fold in that fight, and then even the Omari Akhmedov fight starts it off by pulling guillotine, which is probably the worst thing that you can do against a very top heavy fighter and wrestler like Omari Akhmedov. And then obviously, in that second round, he had some success, but then when he was not able to get his game going, we did see Omari Akhmedov reverse the position and then pretty easily sink in a triangle choke, which is or an arm triangle choke, I should say, which seemed like almost like Tom Breese gave it up to him. That Tom Breese, when he's at his best, it's his striking. I know he's really trying to round out his BJJ game, which is great. Obviously, trying to be a mixed martial artist, but his bright spot is his jab, his ability to stay patient when he's in the striking realm, and just wait for his openings to truly explode on his opponents and really put a beating on them. Now, this is going to be like the toughest or the litmus test for us to know if Tom Breese truly has anything left to offer to the UFC. Not to mention, I wouldn't even be surprised if the UFC actually cuts Tom Breese if he ends up losing this fight to Antonio Antonio Arroyo. Minus 245 obviously indicates that he should go in there and roll, but it's always a mental game when it comes to Tom Breese and his ability to kind of just be there in the moment and actually perform. This is the guy, I don't know if they handpicked him or anything like that, but this is the type of guy that Tom Breese should go out there and absolutely style on. He has a striking advantage. He's going to have the jiu-jitsu advantage. I think he's going to have the cardio advantage too. Now it's all about Tom Breese going out there and actually performing and showcasing that he has all the skills in the world to be, or at least even close to what we thought he could be even before he lost that fight to Sean Strickland several years ago. Again, I think he's the much better striker. I think he'll be cleaner, crisper to the strike. I think he'll be able to evade the big strikes of Antonio Arroyo. I don't think Arroyo is going to be trying to take this fight to the ground, as I do think that Breese has a slight advantage there. But it just comes down to, is Tom Breese going to get broken by a guy like Antonio Arroyo? And a part of me feels like he might. But ultimately, I still will go with Tom Breese here. I think he styles on Antonio Arroyo. Not 100% sure if he actually finishes him, but as long as he's in his groove, gets his striking going, maybe mix in a couple takedowns to try to get that jiu-jitsu going, I think he should actually roll here and really, blow away Antonio Arroyo, who truly is not on his level. So once again, I'll go with Tom Breese. I'll actually take him to win this fight by decision to be on the safe side, but I'm hoping we see him come out there with a fire of some sort and actually end up getting the finish. But just for prediction's sake, I'm going to go with the Tom Breese to win this fight via decision. Duško Todorovic versus Gregory Rodrigues. We got minus 160 on Todorovic and plus 140 on Rodrigues. And it seems like the money is coming in on Rodrigues, who's going to be making his UFC debut. Not to mention, this is going to be his third fight within 3 months. I believe even 2 months, if you want to call it that. He did fight Almatavio and knocked him out. And then he fought Josh Fremd, where he was able to capture the middleweight title over there in LFA. That was less than 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's a very quick turnaround from Gregory, but luckily for him, it wasn't much of a tough test for him to go out there and knock out Josh Fremd the way that he did. Not to mention, he was a plus 190 underdog going into that fight, so there was a lot of heat on Fremd. Unfortunately, Fremd was not able to deal with the power that Gregory was able to put on him. Now, Gregory Rodrigues looks like he's 45 years old, but the guy's only 29 years old, but he's had a lot of experience training with the high-level guys when he was down there in Brazil at first at the X Gym. He was getting time with Lyoto Machida, Anderson Silva, a lot of the big name guys that you knew from back in the day. He was kind of on the come up when they were pretty much at their peak or on the tail end of their careers. And now he's recently moved his training camp over there to Sanford MMA. Probably been a couple years at this point in time, but it seems that's where he's trying to really turn things around. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually within his 2 last fights that he actually made the change over to Sanford MMA. It's obviously helping him as he was able to produce 2 knockouts to eventually find himself into the UFC now. Now, obviously, short notice approach coming in against Duško Todorovic. And again, super short notice, not to mention the fact that he just fought 3 weeks ago. How is that going to play into it, right? Some fighters thrive very well in terms of being able to fight back to back to back to back, whereas other fighters need that time off. Me thinking that this guy, at 29 years old and really trying to make a mark inside the MMA world, coming in with a 9-3 record, he really wanted to push as much as possible and take advantage of this COVID-19 era that we're in, where fighters are just, getting picked up right, left, and center, just based on, COVID-19 protocols and guys getting pushed out last minute. A lot of these guys are staying ready to go and hopefully making a splash within the UFC. I think stylistically speaking, this is a tough matchup for him with Duško. Now, Duško, a lot of people are going to be low on him, especially after he lost to Punahele Soriano last time around the way that he did back in January. But a lot of, actually, you know what, there was a lot of people on Duško that time. I remember doing my rounds that week to with other podcasts and other people, and even just seeing the love on Twitter. Everybody's just like, Duško should be able to go out there and absolutely piece up the one-dimensional Punahele Soriano. But Soriano, very explosive, very quick to the punch, and once he started to straighten out his shots, he was really able to land on the chin of Duško, who, like I said, very much relies on kind of just his head movement to get out of the way of the big shots of his opponents. He does use his footwork a little bit, but he is going to have to shore up some of his striking defense if he's going to want to have some longevity in the sport. Now, he's only 27 years old, so he's 2 years younger than Mr. Gregory Rodrigues, but he does have some solid experience under his belt. Now, in the Teddy Ash fight on the Contender Series, he was able to rely on a clinch-heavy approach where he was able to push Teddy up against the cage and kind of just grind on him out there and then pretty much just win that fight via decision. The Daquan Townsend fight, he mixed in a bit of that clinch up against the cage, but then he eventually dragged the fight to the the ground where he had a massive advantage, found himself in full mount, and was able to really start to rain down big shots on Daquan, eventually getting him out of there midway through the second round, and then obviously losing to Puelles Soriano the way that he did. He wants to be a little bit careful if he wants to decide to take Gregory Rodrigues to the ground here, as I do think that Rodrigues does have the advantage when it comes to jiu-jitsu. He is a national champion Brazilian jiu-jitsu down there in Brazil, and I think that's definitely going to come into play here if that's the route that Duško Todorovic decides to take here. However, I still find that Gregory might be a little bit too slow on the feet to catch Duško, and Duško's, method of getting out of ways of punches will probably work out for him here. The one thing that I will say is that Gregory Rodrigues is a big dude, 6'3", 76-inch reach, so that's a 2-inch height advantage as well as a 2-inch reach advantage. And even when he fought Almatavio 2 fights ago, Almatavio was a guy that went up against Tafon Nchukwi on the Contender Series, I believe, late last year. And he didn't look that small compared to Tafon, who eventually dropped to middleweight. That fight was at light heavyweight. And now Gregory Rodrigues, when he fought Almatavio, it looked like there were 2 or 3 weight classes apart in terms of size. So he's a big, big dude. I know Matavio still is smaller in comparison to Duško Todorovic, but that is something that Todorovic is going to have to worry about in terms of using his head movement to get out of the way. You know that you're going to have a lot of big shots coming your way if Rodrigues does straighten out his shots the way that Puelles Soriano did. Duško will have some trouble in terms of getting out of the way. But I do think that Todorovic will land the better strikes. I think his movement is great. His kicking is great. His ability to maneuver around the cage is going to be very important for him here, especially if he starts to reach the outside of the warning track, as I do believe that Rodrigues will be the one kind of pushing the pressure here and kind of on his front foot. But that might put him in danger of getting hit by Duško Todorovic here, which I think Todorovic will do plenty of times and actually end up knocking out Rodrigues probably in the first or second round of this fight. I think Rodrigues brings some good things to the UFC, but coming in on short notice against a guy like Duško is probably not the best for him. But I do understand why people are trying to jump on the Rodrigues train right now, especially at that plus 160-ish, plus 170-ish line that you could get on him earlier in the week. There is the potential for him knocking out Duško Todorovic, right? We saw Todorovic took a ton of damage against Puelles Soriano. However, he was never completely out, which is why I don't think it's a horrible thing for him to be coming back about 5 months after getting knocked out. But I do think that it is a little bit of concern that people need to worry about if you are laying the chalk on Duško here. Now, I'm picking Duško to win. I'm picking him to win by second round KO. But I think the spots to be chasing here would be the under. I want to see if it's probably placed at 1.5 now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, under 1.5 is plus 100. I'd need at least a 2.5, which is minus 215. Obviously, a little bit juice there. Fight doesn't go to decision, is roughly around that minus 300 range. That's kind of where I'm leaning. I don't think this fight's going to see all 15 minutes. I think we'll see Duško land the better strikes and then eventually put out Gregory Rodrigues in the second round. Let's not forget, Mr. Jordan Williams was very dominant in being able to put away Gregory Rodrigues, and I think that Duško Todorovic could replicate the same, if not a little bit more highlight reel-esque from Todorovic. So I'm going Duško via second round KO. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Miguel Baeza. Good Lord, I am excited for this fight. I think this is the fight that I'm anticipating most on this upcoming card. So we got plus 105 on Santiago Ponzinibbio and minus 125 on Miguel Baeza. And I believe there's been a ton of line movement here, as we did have Santiago Ponzinibbio open up at plus 130, got down to plus 100-ish, and now he's back up to plus 105. But I understand it, right? It's hard to kind of dispel why Santiago Ponzinibbio is getting love, especially as an underdog in this spot. Now, we know the whole rap on Santiago at this point in time, right? He came back after an extended layoff back in January where he got knocked out by Li Jingliang in a fight that was relatively inactive. There was not much that was going on there. It still seemed like Santiago was trying to find his pace. He was trying to find his timing. He was just trying to get his feet wet. A lot of the strikes were pretty much just leg kicks from either side. Both guys were landing good leg kicks, trying to get their hands going. And once their hands really did start to open up later in that first round, that's where we saw Li Jingliang just time the counter perfectly and then absolutely start Santiago Ponzinibbio putting his lights out. Ponzinibbio, did not look like the guy that we knew when he was beating guys like Nordine Taleb, Gunnar Nelson, Mike Perry, and Neil Magny. But I'm not sure how much you can credit it to, the ring rust and all the injuries and infections and all that stuff that Santiago went through while he was off, I believe, close to 2 to 2.5 years, very, very long time off. And he had a lot of injuries and personal health issues to deal with to finally make it back to the cage. But we just don't know how much it's truly affecting him, right? Somebody that kind of comes to mind that I think about who had to go through maybe not like the exact same things, but like similar things in terms of health issues was Jeff Neal, right? Jeff Neal coming back now and he's 0-2 in his last 2 fights, not really able to get his game going, loses to Wonderboy Thompson after coming back after a couple of health scares, and then after that loses to Neil Magny, and then even puts out a statement himself, right? I need to take time off. I don't know what the fuck happened to me based on, all the things that happened to me during that time off, but it's affecting my MMA game. Could it be the same thing here for Ponzinibbio? We just don't know. But even if Ponzinibbio comes back and looks like 75% or 80% of what he used to look like when he was on that crazy run, which, got him a main event slot against Neil Magny, he could be very competitive here against Baeza. He is a great technical striker. He has nasty leg kicks when he wants to throw his leg kicks, but it's just we don't know where he's at mentally, and we don't know even if that knockout kind of, makes him even more gun shy. There's just too many question marks regarding Santiago and what kind of level he's going to be performing at to truly go out there and be confident that he should be, one, the favorite in this fight, and two, that he's actually going to perform like we actually knew he could. He's 34 years old at this point in time. There are things that he needs to go out there and truly fix and change about his game, especially last time around, and just try to tap into what he used to be. But we can't, without a doubt say that he's going to do that here against a young up-and-comer in Miguel Baeza, who is on a own tear of his own, right? Undefeated in the UFC, 3-0 at this point in time, not to mention his contender series victory over Victor Reina, but he's had 3 finishes in the UFC over Hector Aldana, Matt Brown, and most recently Takashi Sato, but those guys are far removed in terms of the level of competition when you're talking about Santiago Ponzinibbio. So this is a huge step up for Miguel Baeza, 28 years old, 10-0, really has a lot of confidence about him, seems to have a glow about him, and is very well trained over there at MMA Masters down there in Miami. And I think that they can devise a good enough game plan to go out there and beat a guy like Santiago Ponzinibbio. I ultimately will be siding with the slightly younger guy here in Baeza, more active, seems to, be more comfortable inside the cage at this point in time. But I would not be shocked at all if Ponzinibbio goes out there and starts getting his own game going and we see that vintage Ponzinibbio that we used to love from back in the day. Baeza obviously has his own durability issues, as we saw in the Matt Brown fight. Matt Brown was close to finishing himself twice in that first round before Baeza was able to shake his cobwebs, get back into it, and then hurt Matt Brown in his own right at the ending of that first round, and then finish him early in that second round. There's just so many X factors in this fight that's truly hard for me to really put a finger on it in terms of, being super confident. By no means is there a lock of the night spot in this fight either. I think both guys are very live. I completely understand why the money is coming in Ponzinibbio, but I do like Baeza here. I think he's just, with him being more active, he has a great skill set himself. Obviously, something that I always touch on when I break down Miguel Baeza fights is his calf kicking game. That should definitely come into play here, where he's, he didn't really get to let it go against Takashi Sato, but I do think we'll see him let it go here against Ponzinibbio, which should allow him to get his hands going. And as long as he's defensively sound here, which it seemed like he was against Takashi Sato, very high guard, and he didn't want to get clipped by anything. Maybe he learned a couple things or two from the Matt Brown fight, getting hurt early in that fight. But I do think that Baeza should be able to go out there, land some good combinations, remain active enough, and maybe even finish Ponzinibbio a little bit later in this fight. But I think we'll see a calculated approach from both guys, right? And that, again, worries me about if you're a Santiago Ponzinibbio backer in terms of, is he doubting himself? Is he gun shy? Is there something in the back of his head that's just not going to let him be the same as he used to? And this is a tough test, right? I think this might even be a tougher test than Li Jingliang. He was a minus 340 favorite going into that Jingliang fight. And now he's it's pretty much a pick'em, but a very slight underdog here against Miguel Baeza. A lot of people are just throwing Ponzinibbio out now just because he got knocked out last time around, and they're completely forgetting about what his career was before that. But it's just I just can't get a grip on the fact that Ponzinibbio, might not look the same compared to what he was before. And that's the reason why I'm going to be taking Baeza here. The one last thing I'll say about this fight, the over 1.5 at -160 is not too bad of a line, as I do think that this will be a very patient fight from both guys, and we should see this go over the 7.5 minute mark. But then again, I did say that about the Li Jingliang and Santiago Ponzinibbio fight, as that was my lock of the night play, was the over 1.5 in that fight, and that blew up in my face after it looked like it was going pretty well for the first 4 or so minutes, and then Li Jingliang uncorks a bomb on Ponzinibbio and puts his lights out. So once again, I'll go with Baeza. I'll go with him to win by decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if either guy gets a finisher, as both guys do have some durability concerns. But ultimately, I will go with Baeza to win by decision, which I will say, if I'm not mistaken, is roughly around plus 300 or plus 400, which I think does have some good value, as I do think that, there is a damn good shot that he can win this fight by decision. So once again, I'll go Miguel Baeza via decision. Roman Dolidze versus Laureano Staropoli. We got -140 on Dolidze and plus 120 on Staropoli. And I believe we've had some line movement on this fight too. We had Staropoli roughly around plus 145. Now he's down to plus 120. And I understand why the love is coming in on the Argentinian. Now Roman Dolidze seems to have completely renovated his training camp over his last couple fights in terms of going from... I believe he had a gym in Austria, somewhere over there, in that part of the world, and then eventually moved shop and came over to Extreme Couture and went under the tutelage of Eric Nixick, who obviously has done a lot of good things, most recently with Francis Ngannou, and most notably with Francis Ngannou. Also, Walt Harris, who's fighting on this card, is also training with them, and you often see pictures with Roman Dolidze and Walt Harris. Roman Dolidze did lose his first ever pro MMA fight last time around against Trevin Giles, in a fight that, a lot of question marks about his fight IQ again, right? A lot of going for heel hooks once again, bad looks in terms of giving up some good positions where Trevin Giles was able to take advantage. Very close fight, I will say that, but Trevin Giles did come out on the winning edge there. But the issues here are, is Dolidze truly evolving as a fighter, right? He still looks like that striker who's trying to go out there and just knock your head off. And then he is, doing some decent work in terms of landing takedowns, which should help him kind of win rounds and win minutes if he's actually successful in doing so. But the issue here is his top control just doesn't seem the greatest. Every so often he goes out there and tries to go for the heel hook, like I said, which gives up position. And there might be one day where he actually pulls it off and gets that submission, but it just hasn't worked out for him as of this point. So he needs to ditch that. I'm hoping Eric Nixick is able to truly get his head in the game and make him shore up those issues. But it's going to be tough against this guy in Laureano Staropoli, who's actually moving up a weight class now. Staropoli spent the majority of his UFC career, well, he's only had 4 fights in the UFC at this point in time, and all of them happened at welterweight. Now he's going up to middleweight. And initially I was thinking, okay, why? He doesn't seem to be, or off memory, he doesn't seem to be the biggest welterweight, but he's 6'1", 71-inch reach. He's only giving up an inch in height here to Roman Dolidze. So once these guys actually face off against one another, you'll truly see that Laureano Staropoli should, fit into this division pretty easily. Now, I think that the volume of Staropoli and the unorthodox nature of his striking approach is going to give Dolidze some issues here, right? Like I said, Dolidze likes to go out there and try to decapitate you, but one thing that we have seen add a wrinkle to his game, which is the takedowns, that could kind of help him kind of stifle the game of Staropoli here, which is ultimately why I'm hesitant on taking the underdog shot on Staropoli. I do think that Staropoli wins, so I ultimately will be picking Staropoli to win this fight, but there is that threat of the takedown, which worries me, as I do believe that Dolidze, who used to fight at lightweight or light heavyweight, he will have the strength advantage and he will be able to get some takedowns. It's just how effective is he going to be with those takedowns? I'm just not truly sure that he'll be able to, go out there and be super successful with it. The Staropoli and Salikhov fight was an interesting one, right? Neither urgency from either guy outside of that second round for Salikhov, where he was able to hurt Staropoli, almost finished him. Staropoli pulled it out and was able to, see the final judges' scorecards, but he actually ended up losing that fight regardless. And then the Tim Means fight, Tim just seemed way more polished of a striker, way more technical of a striker, and way, way more crafty, right? He was setting up traps. He was able to set up beautiful head kicks on numerous occasions to land cleanly on Staropoli. But I do think that Staropoli will bring that similar type of style into this fight against Roman Dolidze, where throwing the spinning stuff, staying on his bicycle, throwing the volume, landing on Dolidze. Dolidze, his striking defense doesn't seem to be the greatest. He seems to enjoy being hit, which is not good, right? Especially when you're going up against a guy like Staropoli, who's going to be able to hit you from all these weird and unorthodox angles. So, again, I would bet Staropoli here, but I do like a couple of the dog spots. I do think a lot of the dogs are barking on this card, but it's just the possible strength advantage that I think that the Leagues is going to have, especially with, securing takedowns, getting takedowns, and, that could ultimately be what sways the judges in his favor. But I do like Staropoli here. Again, if this fight stays in the striking realm, I favor Staropoli. I think he has a good enough chin to withstand the power of Dolidze. And again, I just think that he has the much better striking technique to go out there and put on a pace, put on a volume on Dolidze that Dolidze probably won't be able to keep up with. So I'll go with Staropoli, and I'm going to take Staropoli to win this fight via decision. Just be ever so slightly concerned about the takedown game of Dolidze. I can't harp on that enough, as I do think that could be the difference maker in this fight if he's successful in keeping or in taking down Staropoli. So once again, I'll go with Staropoli, and I'll take him to win this fight via decision. Marcin Tybura versus Walt Harris. We got minus 165 on Tybura and plus 145 on the big ticket, I believe his nickname is, Walt Harris. Walt Harris obviously coming off of 2 bad losses last time around, and let's cut him a little bit of slack, right? Like, I think they rushed him way too early into that Alistair Overeem fight, especially after the death of his daughter, or stepdaughter, I should say. A lot of people remember what happened with that, so I'm not going to regurgitate that too much, but I think people leaning on that Walt Harris coming for revenge, or Walt Harris trying to avenge the loss of his daughter in that Overeem fight. I think that was a bad narrative to go on, and you could even see it in his physique, right? The guy didn't come in shape. It seemed like he was more so there just to collect a paycheck, and it kind of hurts to say that. And again, that was one of those weird events where we just kept getting reminded of the whole Anaya Blanchard thing, and it just wasn't a good look, especially for Harris and even for Overeem, right? Do you really want to be the guy that goes out there and beats the shit out of the guy who just lost his daughter in such a tragic fashion? No, but it's the fight game, and that's exactly what Alistair Overeem was able to do. And not to mention the fact that we got Overeem at minus 155, absolutely insane. So great value on anybody that was able to take Overeem there, because, you just have to evade that big power from Harris early, and then you should be able to win the fight, right? The last time Harris did win a decision was against Andrei Arlovski, but no shit, he popped for steroids after that fight, right? They changed that fight to a no contest, and it was a very close fight. He got outstruck by 20 strikes. I believe it was like 44-24 in favor of Andrei Arlovski, but it seemed like Harris was landing the bigger strikes, or it seemed like he was having more octagon control, which is probably why he ended up getting the decision that night. But it's just not a good look. I think that Harris is a first round KO or bust kind of guy. Otherwise, he's going to get outworked and outslugged by his opponents. The Sergey Spivak fight, less than 40-second fight, gets him out of there quickly. Alexei Oleinik, I think 12 or 15-second fight, gets him out of there quickly. But then once he starts to fight somebody that actually gives him some resistance and some opposition, then he starts to run into some trouble, right? Even the Andrei Arlovski fight, even with Harris on the juice or whatever the fuck he took before that fight, you still see that Arlovski, doesn't really put too much into his shots, and that's kind of what Arlovski has been like in his later part of his career, is just volume. Let's go the full 15 minutes. Whether I finish him, whether I don't, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go the full 50 minutes and not get knocked out. So credit to Arlovski for not getting knocked out there, but still, it shows that when there are guys who I believe Marcin Tybura fits this mold, Alistair Overeem fits this mold, same with Alexander Volkov, fits this mold of a guy that can go out there and beat a guy like Walt Harris. They'll probably drop that first round, but after that, their cardio and their volume and their durability should be able to make up for the lack of skill that Walt Harris brings to the table here. Now, like I said, Spivak and Oleinik, Harris dusts them relatively quickly. The Overeem fight, Overeem was in trouble early, don't get me wrong, and then Walt Harris pretty much empties his gas tank, and then we see Overeem switch the script, get the takedowns, and really start pounding it on Walt Harris, and then eventually getting him out of there in the second round. Alexander Volkov, that's a spot where we don't see Harris have much success at all. And Volkov pretty much controls that fight from the get-go, maintains the distance, really gets his front kick up the middle going, and he really starts to get Walt Harris to start flinching on it. And once he starts flinching on it, then he has him, right? There's an instance closer to the end of the round where he feints the kick or the knee up the middle to the body. You see Walt Harris really bite on it, and then he comes through with a nice 1-2 to really rock Walt Harris, and that was pretty much the end. I think that's where the ultimate nail was put into the coffin for Walt Harris in that fight. We saw Alexander Volkov quickly go out there and finish him in the second round, but that fight was done pretty much a third way through that first round. I think Marcin Tybura can bring that same type of energy. Now, not a Volkov type of striking approach, but he can bring the whole MMA game here, right? He's really starting to distance himself from the chin issues that he had earlier in, 5 fights ago against Augusto Sakai, who fights in the main event. You see, even before that, Shamil Abdurrahimov finished him in the second round. But now he's put together 4 solid wins, 3 decisions, 1 KO over Greg Hardy, who just seemed to gas in that fight. But Marcin Tybura is really rounding out his game, right? I believe he's a brown belt, if not a black belt at this point in time. Actually, he is a black belt. I will say that he is a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and I think he's really starting to bring that into his game by mixing in the takedowns. And great on him. I believe it was the Spivak. It must have been the Spivak fight where he's playing on the feet and making it serviceable enough against Spivak. But once that 2.5 to 2 minute mark hits, he goes for the takedown, gets the fight to the ground, and really starts grinding out his opponents. The Spivak fight and the Grisham fight look pretty much similar, right? Really successful with the takedowns. The Ben Rothwell fight, right? He drops the first round, but then in the second round really starts to put up the volume a little bit more on Rothwell, really starts to attack the body, and then in the third round gets the fight to the ground and really starts grinding out Rothwell there too. That one surprised me because I was on Rothwell a little bit. Not a lock of the night play by any means or anything like that, but I thought he had the takedown defense, I thought he had the cardio, and I thought he had the power to really hurt Marcin Tybura in that fight, but he landed some big shots. Tybura kept coming forward and showed that he was really starting to distance himself, like I said earlier, from that Augusto Sakai and Shamil Abdurrahimov fights, which makes me a little bit more confident in taking him against guys that have some heavy power in their hands, and that's probably all they have in their hands to get the victory. And then the Greg Hardy fight, another one where he takes some big shots early, survives that, Greg Hardy gasses, and then he finally finishes him in that second round. Beautiful takedown in that second round to ultimately, completely deflate Greg Hardy in that fight, and then he finishes him with some ground and pound there. Now, this Walt Harris fight, it all comes down to the first 2.5 to 3 minutes. Because if Walt Harris doesn't finish him early here, I think he's truly going to have some trouble with the all-around MMA game that Mr. Marcin Tybura is going to be bringing here. Now, Walt Harris can go ahead and change camps as much as he wants, right? He trained out of Birmingham, Alabama, where he's from. He trained a bunch at American Top Team back in the day. And now he switched up and he's gone over to Vegas now, training with Eric Nixick and those guys over at Extreme Couture. He has Roman Dolidze that he's training with often, even staying at Francis Ngannou's place, if I'm not mistaken, training with him a little bit as well. And he has a bunch of other guys that you see in his pictures constantly, right? Dan Ige, even though those guys are much lower in the weight class, he's trying to surround himself with guys that can go out there and push him and take him to that next level. But I think he's just too far ahead at this point in time in terms of his age. The guy's 37 years old. He's 13-9 at this point in time. Like, he doesn't bring much to the table outside of that first 2.5 to 3 minutes, because then I think that's where it really starts to drop off. That's where he really starts to let his opponent kind of dictate the pace, get the takedowns, and really start to rough him up. Now, we saw him come in incredible shape in that Alexander Volkov fight, right? If I'm not mistaken, he came in 10 to 15 pounds lighter than he did compared to the Alistair Overeem fight, and he looked in great shape. A lot of people were very, very surprised to see him in that type of shape, but good luck for him. But that still wasn't enough. I found it hilarious that second round, the beginning of the second round of the Volkov fight, 20 seconds into the fight, you see him look up at the clock like, dog, you still got 4.5 minutes to go with the Savage and Alexander Volkov. Now, Volkov is a much better fighter than Tybura. I'll definitely give him that. But I do think Tybura has the great all-around MMA game to go out there and really put it on Mr. Harris here. And I think he's really going to make him work, especially if he can survive that first 2.5 to 3 minutes. After he can do that, I'm sure the takedowns will come a little bit easier for Tybura. And I could see Tybura finishing him in the second or third round. Tybura via submission, I think somebody said was around plus 1,000. I think that's a little bit of a good look, but I could also see Tybura going out there and ground and pounding Walt Harris, who's not going to have much resistance off of his back after that first round. So this could be a good live betting opportunity, right? If you watch this fight, if Tybura survives that first round, I do expect a big onslaught from Harris in that first round. hit that live line, right? You might be able to get some good plus money on Tybura going into that second round. But even pre-fight, I'm quite confident in Tybura in this spot. I think he's distanced himself enough from those KO losses that he should be able to take whatever Walt Harris brings to him. And he's, really rounded out his game where he's really starting to mix in the takedowns and start to punish his opponents from on top. So I like Tybura a lot here. There is a spot earlier in this card that I like a lot more because I feel like the resistance is a lot less in that fight compared to this fight. But I do think that if Tybura gets out of that first 2.5 to 3 minutes, this is going to be his fight. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'd be surprised if Walt Harris gets a win in this fight outside of the first round. If it happens outside of the first round, I'll give him a little bit more respect and give him a little bit more due in terms of changing up the training camp over there to Eric Nixick in Extreme Couture and maybe rounding out his game a little bit better there. But I just don't see it happening in one training camp. I don't see it happening against a well-rounded guy in Marcin Tybura who's really seemed to find his groove, especially over his last 4 fights. So once again, I'll go with Marcin Tybura, and I'm going to take him to win this fight either by second or third round TKO, but I won't neglect that submission prop if it's still in that crazy 1,000-ish range come fight time. So once again, I'll go with Marcin Tybura. I'll go with second round KO. And last thing I'll say, the third round prop here is live in my opinion, so I will be looking to target that as well once the odds drop for that. So once again, I'll go Marcin Tybura, second round TKO via ground and pound. All right, main event time. We got Jairzinho Rozenstruik against Augusto Sakai. We got -115 on Rozenstruik and minus 105 on Sakai. The line has been shifting a little bit. Sakai was about +115 earlier in the week, but now we got him at -105 as a lot of people are starting to pour in that money on Sakai. Not 100% sure how this line is going to continue to shift out or shake out as this week goes on. I am recording this on the Saturday, a full week before the actual fight, but I do expect, if the public is smart, if there are some sharps out there, the line should be coming in on Sakai, as I believe that he should be favored in this spot. So if you can get him at plus money at the time of you recording this, I do believe he's worth a bit of a shot. If I can get him at plus money on one of my websites here, I'll more than likely be making him a solid dog spot on this card, as I do believe he has all the tools to go out there and beat a guy like Jairzinho Rozenstruik. So let's start off on the Augusto Sakai side. He is coming off his first loss in the UFC, where he dropped a knockout loss in the 5th round where he got ground and pounded by Alistair Overeem. And that was his first time in a 5-round fight in the UFC, so you got to cut him a little bit of slack. He was winning those first 3 rounds pretty handily, and he even got up to -400 on the live betting window before in the 4th round. Alistair Overeem was able to drag him to the ground and start really wearing on him, and then we saw the cardio issues of Augusto Sakai really start to muster up and try to pretty much screw him in that fight. Ultimately, Alistair Overeem goes out there and ground and pounds him early in that 5th round, as he was really starting to dish out the damage as that fight started to drag on even later into the rounds. But you got to give Sakai a little bit of slack, right? First ever 5-round fight. He did seem to perform pretty well in those first 3 rounds, but it seemed like he blew his load a little bit too early, trying to get the chinny Alistair Overeem out of there early and was not able to. I think that's a great source of experience to go out there and have successful early rounds against a legend like Alistair Overeem, but then it really starts to kick in the later the fight goes that, okay, wait, we still got 2 more rounds to go. If this was a 3-round, he probably wins that fight pretty easily, but it is a 5-rounder, just as this fight with Jairzinho Rozenstruik is. The difference here, though, Alistair Overeem, as we saw in his later parts of his UFC career, really start to focus on the grappling aspects of his game, right? Really start to drag his opponents down, just like he did against Walt Harris, just like he did against Augusto Sakai, and really start to grind these guys out, try to get some big ground and pound going from on top, and it worked out for him. And Augusto Sakai, having to deal with that type of approach, it really does drain your gas tank, having to defend takedowns, and then obviously taking a shit kicking from the top position by Overeem does not help either. But with Jairzinho Rozenstruik, he doesn't have that much to worry about, right? You have a guy that heavily relies on his power, and if he doesn't have his power going for him, then it gets a little bit shaky because the activity is just not there. That's why I think Sakai truly beats him, right? Sakai's never been knocked out outside of that ground and pound loss that he had to Alistair Overeem last time around, but his only other loss was that split decision loss to Czech Congo back when he was in Bellator. So he's eaten some big shots in the past. It's not like he gets one punch KO'd, or we don't really see him get rocked and dropped by crazy shots on the feet. It's just that one ground and pound loss that he had to Alistair Overeem. Are you expecting ground and pound from Jairzinho Rozenstruik here? Probably not, right? Jairzinho heavily relies on getting his big shots going, just like he did against Junior Dos Santos. He dropped that first round, kind of finding his range, and then in the second round, really started to let it go and found that big shot to eventually hurt Junior Dos Santos, then follow up with some big shots to get him out of there. But you see, in the Cyril Gane fight, perfect example, and obviously Gane and Sakai are two completely different fighters, but one thing that they do have in common is that they are a little bit more volume based, right? They don't rely on that one shot KO power like Augusto Sakai was able to get Chase Sherman and Marcin Tybura out there pretty quickly. But then when you see their fights extended, like the Andrei Arlovski fight, the Blagoy-Ivanov fight, and even earlier fights in Sakai's career, he does rely a little bit more on volume and not that crazy heavyweight slugger type of approach that a lot of these guys do, which I do think that Jairzinho Rozenstruik relies on as well. I will say, obviously, the Blagoy-Ivanov fight close, not to mention it was a split decision win for him, but also that cheeky third round fence grab that Sakai had that kind of allowed him to stay vertical against Blagoy-Ivanov, because who knows what would have happened if Ivanov was able to secure that takedown, that head and arm throw, if he was able to actually secure it, and how the rest of that third round were played out. Luckily for Sakai, only got warned, didn't get a point taken away or anything like that, and was able to get his hand raised via split decision that night. But I just like what I see from Sakai, right? Volume. I believe we'll see a little bit more patience from him this time around, so that he can have, better cardio. And again, he's not going to have too much resistance to worry about in regards to, getting taken down or being pushed too much. He's just going to have to worry about the big shots coming his way from Rozenstruik. Now, even though Rozenstruik has that fifth round knockout victory over Alistair Overeem, I think his power does start to taper off a little bit when he's dealing with a guy that's a little bit smarter, like Cyril Gane, and I believe Augusto Sakai here. If Sakai can kind of just push him up against the cage, and Cyril Gane had a lot of success in that too, same with Alistair Overeem, just clinch fuck him up against the cage, stay active enough with dirty boxing and some knees on the knee, the Charlie horse, if that's what you want to call it. Just stay active enough so that the referee doesn't separate you. Even if he does, get back into it. You know what I mean? Stay on your bicycle a little bit. Get the punches off from the outside. Augusto Sakai does have some good front kicks up the middle too that he could utilize here to kind of keep Rozenstruik on the outside. And I think he can stay active enough and defensively sound enough to stay away from the big power of Rozenstruik. Now, if Rozenstruik doesn't have that power, what else does he have, right? You don't often see him winning by decision. I think he has one decision victory earlier in his MMA career, but most of his victories have come via KO. Again, the Alistair Overeem fight, right? He's winning that fight up until, he's losing that fight. Alistair Overeem wins, I believe, the first 4 rounds on 2 judges' scorecards, and one judge actually gave that 4th round to Jairzinho Rozenstruik. But Overeem was a second away from winning that fight just off of being, patient, out-voluming, and staying away from the big shots. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't able to stay away from it with 4 or 5 seconds left in in the fight, pretty much, and then he gets knocked out. Obviously, we know that infamous picture of his lip being dismembered, and it was disgusting. But still, I truly believe guys like Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Walt Harris, who we also obviously talked about earlier in this podcast, Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou, they're almost KO or bust type of fighters, right? Derek Lewis has a little bit more longevity with his power. He always has these crazy comeback knockouts. Walt Harris, a guy that has early power and then starts to taper off and then starts to give up, his fights. And then Jairzinho Rozenstruik, right? Same thing. Luckily for him, again, like I said, the Overeem fight, there was longevity in his power there where he was able to get that knockout late in the fight, but when he gets out-volumed and outworked, that's where he runs into trouble, and that's exactly what I think Augusto Sakai can do here. It's just the pacing that Sakai has to worry about so that he doesn't find himself in trouble in that 4th and 5th round where he did start to slow against Overeem. Again, I feel like he had way more resistance and way more activity in that Overeem fight that he had to deal with compared to what he's going to have to deal with here with Jairzinho Rozenstruik. So strap yourselves in. This might be another boring fight like the Cyril Gane and Jairzinho Rozenstruik fight, but you can't pretty much blame Gane. You can't blame Sakai when they're trying to stay away from the big power, because one little slip up just ask Alistair Overeem and you're going to have your money. So this might be another boring fight, which is what I'm expecting, and I'm going to be taking Augusto Sakai to win this fight via decision because I just don't see any other way that Rozenstruik wins this fight other than knocking out Sakai here, and I think that's a low probability, and I think a lot of people are kind of just holding on to that a little bit too much. But when you look at this as an overall scope, if he's not able to get that knockout, It's kind of fucked. And I'll go with the durability that we've seen from Sakai. Even though he was getting ground and pounded to death by Alistair Overeem in that fight, he was never like truly out, right? It was just exhaustion. It was just gassing pretty much. And I don't think that we're going to see that approach here from Rozenstruik, which leads me to believe that Sakai should be a pretty safe spot here as long as he doesn't get starched early. So I like Sakai here. And I like him to win by decision. I think it's around plus 400, plus 450 for that decision prop on Sakai. And I think that's very, very juicy, considering I think that Rozenstruik is very durable. I think Sakai, very durable as well. And I do see this fight going the full 5 rounds. Over 1.5, I've seen a lot of people smashing that. That's around minus 200. I think there's some decent value there still, as I do believe that this might be a slow-paced fight. Sakai will stay away from the big power. I don't think Rozenstruik's going to get knocked out, so we should see it head into the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and even 5th round, which is why ultimately I'll be taking Augusto Sakai to win this fight via decision. And those are the breakdowns. Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdowns, and hopefully we can change or parlay this analysis and all these predictions into some cash for you guys this weekend at UFC Vegas 28. As always, you guys know that we got a ton of great content, live content coming to you throughout the week, so do stay tuned for that. I will let you guys know right off the bat, I don't have the cast for the Ultimate Weigh-In Show on Friday set yet. I do have a couple guys already set in stone. I'm just waiting to round it out with my third person, but it is a special start time this Friday. Again, as I said at the top of the show, I will be going to a cottage this Friday evening, so I won't be able to do it at the regular time at 9 p.m. Eastern. So I'm moving it up to 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday afternoon. That's pretty much right after the weigh-ins. So 3 p.m. Eastern, the Ultimate Weigh-In Show, that's when it's going down. But obviously Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, propping you up as always with me and Cody. Friday, obviously 3 p.m. Eastern, but I'm also going to be doing my live stream for the live weigh-in show. That should go down at noon Eastern, all the way up until 2 p.m. Then I'm going to take an hour off, and then I'm right back at it for the Ultimate Weigh-In Show as well. So a ton of great content coming for you guys on the live stream side of things. And great to be back. We had 1 week off, but we're right back into the thick of things with UFC Vegas 28. And if I'm not mistaken, we have 4 straight events, then another week off. So let's make the most of these 4 straight events. Not to mention we got Bellator, PFL all coming up in June as well. So it's going to be a busy month. Let's try to turn all of that into some cash. Appreciate you guys watching as always. Make sure you guys hit that like, hit that subscribe, check out the Patreon, and obviously check out Coolbet as well. All the links are in the description below, so make sure you guys check that out. Good luck on your bets this weekend, and I'll see you guys throughout the week. Good luck once again.